actually be going through conducting a safe system assessment. So we've talked very much about the principles, and we've looked at different environments and different road users and things like that. Now we're going to start to actually apply that in reference to the safe system assessment framework. So all of that hard work is now going to get actually injected into the SSA. We are going to be looking at specifically some of the different safe system assessment guidelines that are out there. We reference the Austroads framework. Specific jurisdictions have their own kind of, additional supplementary resources within that space. We're going to have a chat through what is the most pertinent part of a safe system assessment, which is the matrix. The matrix is just a fancy word for a table. You're going to have a go at actually producing one of your own SSA matrices. So that's going to be very, very relevant. We'll talk through about writing up a safe system assessment report and things that do need to be completed and also documented as part of the report. And have a chat through this idea of what can be referred to as primary treatments and what can be referred to as supporting treatments. So there's these two main categories in which all road infrastructure treatments can fit into, primary or supporting, and we'll go through those definitions. Just a reminder to please count your wallies. So this will just be a brief recap of some of the things that we've gone through. So the safe system, we're all very familiar with, something that we've committed to at a federal level and a state level, and likely in your LGA as well. And one of the key components of this is understanding that human beings will make errors, and the system should be set up in a way that those errors do not cost that person's life or does not result in serious injury. Another key element is that the human bodies are vulnerable. So there's only so much speed, so much force that we can withstand as humans before quite serious outcomes do occur. We need to acknowledge that during the safe system assessment process and identify mitigating measures to help reduce that one as a risk. We've banged on a lot about this topic, which is our risk calculation, and I've just been abbreviating it to ELS. So the exposure times the likelihood times severity. You're actually going to see how that gets applied today. So it's no longer just a high-level calculation. You're going to see it in action and see the tangible outputs of exactly how this is measured. So that's exciting. We spoke about our crash type and the kinetic energy tolerances. So for its head-on crash, we're looking around the 70 km/h mark. For an intersection, 90-degree crash, it's around the 50 km/h mark. Vulnerable road users, so collisions with pedestrians, cyclists or motorcyclists, around the 30k mark. So those kind of speed thresholds become very relevant as we go on to actually score the severity levels for different crashes. To help guide new practitioners within this space, there is this scoring guidance sheet. There is a note to say that it is, a general indication, and you do require some degree of professional judgment just to make sure it all makes sense. But this will become very, very relevant at the end of today's discussion. And also, we're going to give you an assignment at the end of today. And I'd highly recommend just reflecting back on this slide in particular, because you can see that there's numbers there. And those numbers refer to the severity score. So we'll apply that later on in today's module, but just remember that this is a very, very useful reference when you're actually completing your SSA matrix. All right, so let's talk about how to actually do an SSA. Now, of course, we could have started with this. We could have just gone straight into this topic from module 1, but it's really, really important that we've got that groundwork kind of completed and that foundation of understanding, particularly the exposure, likelihood, and severity. The reason that we've been touching on that time and time again in the previous modules is because that is incredibly important that we understand that well prior to actually completing an SSA. Now, I'm interested to hear from you. And Brett, if you don't mind launching the first poll for today. I'm keen to hear about your experience with SSAs. Just in a moment, we'll get a poll. There we go. So what has been in your involvement with safe system assessments? Nothing. Safe system what now? I've heard the term, but don't know much more. I've had one done on one of my projects. I've done one. I live, breathe, and eat safe system assessments. I could be wrong, but is that breathe or breath? I think I found another typo for you, Loretta. I see.
Oh, we should get you to go through all of our
I'm a bit of a
quizzes.
grammar
It
nut,
is.
aren't I?
Thank you. No, I'm surprised it hasn't been brought up earlier, but thank you. I'll get that fixed later.
We'll give you 5 more seconds. You're not marked on this. It's just to give us a bit of an indication. 3, 2, 1, and we'll close that poll there and share the results. And great. So there is a bit of a spread today. No stress if you've never heard of it. That's fine. But if you have heard of it, that's excellent. I'm particularly excited for those that have said that they live, breath, and eat safe system assessments, because my internet drops out, we'll just pass it on to those people to run the rest of the module there, Loretta. But that's good that we've got a variety of skills within this space. Loretta.
Thank you. Well, I have a question. If you could briefly answer the difference between an SSA and a safe system audit. So an assessment and an audit.
It's a good question. So in New Zealand, they actually don't have the safe system assessment. They have the safe system audit, which is a combination of a road safety audit and a safe system assessment. So it's kind of brought together both of those risk assessment methodologies, it's combined it, and it's called it a safe system audit. So if you're working within New Zealand, that's where you may have heard that term. Otherwise, the safe system audit term is quite possibly just been incorrectly referenced. Within Australia, we would either do a road safety audit or a safe system assessment, and we have that demarcation between both of those frameworks. So only New Zealand would actually combine the two there. Hopefully that answered that question there. We won't be focusing on the New Zealand's framework today. We've got a separate course that kind of looks into that one. Instead, what we will flick through is the Austroads Guide to Safe System Assessment Framework. So this was developed 8 years ago now, and this is largely what we will be referencing, and this is, you know, the safe system assessment that we will be conducting and teaching as part of this course will be in accordance with what is described within this guidelines. You're welcome to download it off our LMS. I believe we've got a copy of it there. Otherwise, you can just log on to Austroads. They provide all their reports and guidelines for free. So you're welcome to get a copy of it there. But as I mentioned at the start, there are jurisdictional supplementary information, I guess you could call it. So Victoria and South Australia, DIT, we've got our own additional sections as part of a safe system assessment. It's nothing significant. It's nothing I would refer to as a departure or anything like that. It's basically just providing additional guidance where the Austroads framework is a little bit cloudy or nebulous. It just provides a bit more information there. There's a lot of overlap between the Victorian one and the DIT one. Queensland, it's not shown here, but up in TMR, there's like an SSA scoring Excel spreadsheet as well, which is another little intricacy. But by and by, there's a lot of similarity between each jurisdiction, so I wouldn't get too caught up about all of those differences. The New Zealand one, so that was the one that I referenced earlier, they have the largest difference because they have combined the road safety audit and the safe system assessment just into one big risk assessment methodology. So if you're working in New Zealand, that jurisdiction does have a different practice compared to Australia. Okie dokie. So this slide, what we're looking at here is actually the output of a safe system assessment. So rather than take you through stage by stage and looking at each section of a safe system assessment report, I just want to show you the most pertinent piece of the puzzle, basically. There's a lot to look at here, so I'm going to spend a bit of time just chatting through exactly what we are looking at. So along the, I guess you'd call it the x-axis, we can see that we've got different crash types that have been bundled up like this. So we've got run-off road crash, we've got head-on crashes, intersection crashes, other, we'll speak to that in a moment, pedestrian crashes, cyclist, motorcyclist. So we've got 7 crash types that are analysed as part of the safe system assessment. Along the y-axis is the score. So each of those crash types is awarded a score, a numerical value. And I'll show you in a moment how that score is calculated. The thing you need to remember with the score is the lower the score, the better that solution is aligned with safe system principles. So an easy way to remember it is the safe system, Vision Zero, it's all about heading towards zero. Ideally, we want our scores going towards zero because the lower the score, the better that project is aligned with safe system principles. Or you can just think of it like golf. You want to get a lower score, whatever works for you. So that's the scoring side of things. In each of those crash types, you can see we've got 4 bars. And the bars, you can see the legend there. We've got the red, meaning existing conditions. The orange is design option 2. And I've just demonstrated what that orange is in the figure below. The orange is a roundabout in this specific example. Design option 3A is a signalized modified T. Okay, so it's a signalized intersection, but the geometry is a modified T. You haven't heard that term. I've got photos of it later. And design option 3B is a signalized intersection, but a more conventional T intersection, right? So quickly, what we can identify with this output is, I'll just pick one. Let's have a look at the runoff road. We can see that the runoff road crash risk score for existing conditions is a 15. For the design option 2, the roundabout, we can see that that score is dropping. So another way to interpret that is the roundabout treatment that is being investigated at this stage is showing improved safe system alignment for the runoff road crash type. However, for the signalized options, there's no change. You've also got a score there of 15. You can work your way along each of those crash types and quickly identify which areas of the possible road trauma that could occur are being improved by designs or hopefully not made worse. But an example of that made worse is actually in the cyclist category. And we can see the roundabout condition, that proposed design is eliciting a higher safe system assessment score. In other words, the proposed design of the roundabout is making things less safe for cyclists. And that actually kind of ties in well with general principles of roundabouts. We know that unless the roundabout has been designed with cyclist safety in mind, it's generally going to be a poorer outcome for bike riders. So that's an example where we're actually seeing that raised level of risk. If you were in a management role or a director role or anything like that, and you don't have time to be able to read whole reports, these kind of outputs are just fantastic because it lets you readily identify where risks are going down and where risks are going up. So you could just quickly see, okay, if we are going for the roundabout, why is the cyclist risk going up and what can we do to mitigate that? And then you could potentially work with your team to be able to bring that bar chart further down so that you're not making things worse. The final note that I wanted to make on this slide here is just the motorcyclist level of risk. You can see that it remains consistent. That's actually not uncommon. Unless you're doing, a specific motorcycle safety project where the objective of the project that you're looking at is to improve motorcycle crash risk, unless that's the project you're looking at, it's likely that there's no changes for motorbikes purely because they are so vulnerable, and unless there's specific treatments involved in that project aimed at reducing the risk for motorcyclists, it's not uncommon to see that that consistency across the existing conditions and the design options. Loretta, any questions so far about our outputs for an SSA?
No, nothing. Thanks, Max.
Fabulous. I'll keep plodding along. Before getting stuck into the matrix, it's very important that we define the context of the SSA. So there's actually these prompts, and these prompts are provided as part of the Austroads guide. So you can just copy it straight out of the Austroads or copy it here. Basically like high-level thought pieces for you and the SSA team to be able to consider and critique and examine so that you've got a good understanding of what the existing conditions are and what the project is proposing. So things that are asked is, well, what is the reason that we're actually looking at this project? One of the reasons could be to reduce congestion. And that's an interesting one, because if you're reducing congestion, then safety may not be the priority there. It's possible that whatever you're proposing has higher crash risk scores. I've worked on a number of SSAs where the existing conditions will be, at this level, and then what's being proposed is above, indicating that you're spending millions of dollars, but you're actually not getting a safety benefit. And that's because the reason for the project is actually to reduce congestion. It can be a difficult conversation to have with your client when you're actually giving them this report that says, you know, you're basically making things worse for safety. But that is the point of the safe system assessment, just to be objective about the level of risk associated with the existing condition and design or design solutions. You'd consider things, the function of the road and the adjacent land use. If it's applicable to your jurisdiction, you'd have a chat through the movement in place function. So whether it's a high movement corridor or it's a places for people, if you've got that embedded within your jurisdiction, you'd make reference to that framework, just to demonstrate that you've got a breadth of understanding. Speeds are very important to mention. You discuss the speed limit, but also, if you've got it, the operating speeds of the environment, just so you've got a good understanding of how road users are actually operating within that space. You'd respond to what road users are expected. So as I mentioned previously, like if you're working near a school, that may elevate the severity of specific crash types. If it's near a retirement village for elderly pedestrians, things like that. Also, if there's any specific land use features that would attract that demographic. So if you're working near a sports stadium or something like that, anything to do with that, then you've got a potential for a wider range of demographics. Finally, vehicle composition. So if you're able to ascertain what percentage of heavy vehicles are present or commercial vehicles, also motorcyclists, and if you happen to know any other, maybe they run lots of vintage car events in that area or something like that, where you may have other types of vehicles that are perhaps not the traditional fleet that we have on a general network, but gets a little bit nebulous there. Anyway, you can copy this straight from the prompts, and then in the comments section, just dot point out exactly how you've analyzed each of those prompts, or you can write them as paragraphs and create a nice report in that fashion. We tend to just go with a table format that you're seeing here with those dot points, just to make it clear and concise, and demonstrate how we've answered each of those prompts. That's one of the first things that you would do, just to set up the context there. Loretta.
Thanks, Max. Just a question that came through. And the question is that because it can be considered reducing congestion as increasing traffic and increasing speed?
Yes, that's certainly one of the reasons. So it can be increasing traffic volumes, which would increase the exposure. The other thing with, reducing congestion is generally that means more traffic lanes. And if you're a pedestrian crossing more traffic lanes, that also increases the risk for you, because there's additional conflict points for that collision to occur.
Yeah, and next question is, can composition be used to consider before, after scenarios for development assessment? Example, a greenfield site with a proposed shopping centre.
Absolutely, it can. And any of those assumptions would be best to be spelled out within this section here, because this is basically where you are setting the foundation for the rest of your assessment. So within the Safe System Assessment Matrix, if you are, mentioning in the future case scenario, there is going to be, additional pedestrian demand or induced demand due to additional developments and things like that. This section here is where you'd basically clarify that assumption. Perhaps you've got, information from the clients that they're aware of this development occurring, or they're the one actually doing the development. And that's basically where you spell it all out. But yes, that can certainly be considered as part of your assessment. So the safe system matrix, this is really the crux of a safe system assessment. It's the big piece of work that you'll be doing, and where you'd be spending a lot of your time if you were actually doing your safe system assessments. So I'll talk through it. As I said, matrix, it's just the same word as a table, so don't get too concerned. The columns at the top, we can see we've got the headings of those 7 crash types. So we've got run-off road, head-on, intersection, other, pedestrian, cyclist, motorcyclist. Now, I did say I was going to define what that other category is. And the easiest way is it's a catch-all. So any other crash type that does not neatly fit into those other categories. An example of an other crash would be a side swipe crash, so changing lanes and those types of crashes, or parking vehicles as you're kind of getting out of a car park, if it's angled parking and you have a rear end type of collision, that will be placed in the other. A more dramatic version of the other would be if you were assessing a site that had a level rail crossing, and you could put a vehicle collision with a train in that other category. So it is by all means just a catch-all, and whatever is appropriate for your specific site is what you would put within that other. So that's my first note. The other note I wanted to make about is pedestrian, cyclists, and motorcyclists. The reason that they've been separated out is because they're vulnerable. They have, that different speed impact threshold compared to the other side of this matrix, where you're in a vehicle, you can survive higher speeds. So let's just take an example of if we had a pedestrian and they were walking at an intersection. So they were crossing at a signalized intersection. If they're struck by a vehicle, we would classify that as a pedestrian crash. Even though it's happened at an intersection, the salient point is it occurred to a pedestrian. So solely focused on the mode of transport in those instances. Saying if a cyclist is hit at an intersection, we would define that as a cyclist risk. So we would put it in this category. Same for motorcyclists as well. So that's a good point to kind of reference. We need to always separate our vulnerable road users and just treat them separately because of that different impact speed compared to vehicle impact speeds.
Hey Max, just on that, has there ever been any consideration on having a separate category for heavy vehicles?
It's a good question. We'll give a prize out there, Loretta. I like it. So conventionally, the way that heavy vehicles are catered for within this, there's 2 ways you could do it actually. The more common way is increasing your severity levels. In fact, you can actually see this dot point here. If you've got a high proportion of heavy vehicles, then the score that you actually give for your severity could be increased if there was no heavy vehicles or a very low number. So let's say you have a road that was 25% heavy vehicles, perhaps you bump up all your scores to take that into consideration. Another way that you could potentially capture that risk is within this other category, just reference heavy vehicle crashes. And so you've got a separate column there just to be able to define the level of risk associated with heavy vehicles. It's a good question, though. Very good question. What I'm going to go through now is I'm going to chat through each of these rows, and I'm going to have to do a little bit of back and forth, unfortunately, just because the matrix references the scoring sheet and it's just over multiple slides. So apologies if things get a little bit messy here. It's really good that we're recording this part, because if you need to come back to it, this is really where, as I mentioned, the crux of the work goes into. Right?
Hey, I might just ask you a couple of questions if that's okay.
Let's do it.
Just before you sort of move on. So the first one is, what about tram-only corridors, tram right-of-way merging into shared roads? Is that considered intersection or other? What if this example includes pedestrians and cyclists? That's the first one.
Right. So if it was trams, I would be putting tram collisions in the other, even if it's colliding with vehicles at an intersection or anything like that. I'd still be putting the tram collisions there. If it's a tram collision with a pedestrian, I would be putting it in the pedestrian category and referencing it there, because that is the significant point. Basically, if there's ever a pedestrian crash, put it in the pedestrian column. It's the rule of thumb.
Thank you. Next one is again about the matrix. So vulnerable users are if they are hit by a vehicle. What about crashes bike to bike or bike to motorbike or bike to roadside features?
Very, very good point. That is relevant. So within the cyclist one, as you say, you tend to focus on the vehicle to cyclist collision purely because the level of severity associated with that crash is higher, as I'm sure you can understand. Let's say you were working in an off-road environment and it was a shared path and you weren't looking at any carriageways at all. You weren't looking at any road environments. It was a safe system assessment of a shared path, which you can very much do. And I've been involved in as well. So that does exist. In those scenarios, the cyclist collision that you are going to be analysing would be the cyclist to cyclist or the cyclist to pedestrian. So in those scenarios, you can actually tweak this matrix to fit your specific scope. If you were doing that as well, it's quite possible that these ones would not be relevant, because if you're just looking at a shared path, the way that you would tend to look at things would be pedestrian and cyclist crash risks and focus on them. So you actually might have an abridged matrix. The Austroads Guide doesn't actually spell out exactly how you could manipulate that. There's no consistency, or this is the standard for kind of working with those types of environments, but it does acknowledge that this matrix, can be adapted to suit the specific scope that you're looking at. But generally, the cyclist collisions, you're looking at vehicle to cyclist purely because the level of severity is higher. And so you're basically saying, what's the worst case scenario? Another good question, though. Let's give a prize out there. So, as I said, I'm going to chat through these rows now, and you can see that those rows are what we've been hammering on about, the exposure, likelihood, and severity. And for the first four columns, the way that we measure the exposure is the AADT. So just your vehicles per day. To measure pedestrian exposure, it's just the number of PEDs. To measure cyclist exposure, it's the number of cyclists. Motorcyclist exposure, number of motorcyclists. So this row is generally the easiest to fill out as part of an SSA, because if you know the number you are dealing with, so I'm just going to make up an example. Let's say we have 6,000 vehicles per day for the road that we're looking at, right? and I may as well make up other numbers as well. Let's say we've got 60 peds and 30 cyclists. I don't know the motorcyclists, but I'll show you a little cheat for that one. This is where we get our scoring from. So now it's the rows have become the columns. I'm just going to cross off these ones because it's too much text and I don't want you to get too focused on all the other stuff going on this slide. I'm just going to look at the exposure stuff first. So to give a road or the site that you're assessing a score of 0, you need to say that there is no exposure to a certain crash type. In other words, there is no side flow or intersecting roads, cyclists are banned, pedestrians can't enter that space, or vice versa, vehicles cannot enter that space. That's the only time you can do a score of 0 for exposure. It's pretty rare. To give it a score of 1, you'll see for runoff road, head-on, and other crash types, AADT is less than 1,000 vehicles per day. So this is basically just defining where does my number fit within this scoring system. For cyclist, peds, and motorcycle crash types, volumes are less than 10 units per day. So in the example, and I should have written it down, but I'll go from memory, I said 6,000 AADT, and I think I said 60 peds, 30 cyclists. So let's do this scoring together as an example. To give it a score of 2, got an AADT between 1,000 and 5,000, so that's not the score. Score of 3 is between 5 and 10,000, so that would be the score that I apply, because I said we've got 6,000 vehicles per day. For pedestrians, I said 60, so it would also get a score of 3, but for cyclists, I said 30, so it would get a score of 2. To get a score of 4 is where AADT is higher than 10,000 vehicles a day. Cyclist, ped, motorcycle crashes are also higher, 100 units per day. So I'll go back to my little matrix here and I'll have a go at filling this in. We'll see how good my memory is. So for runoff road, it would be a score of 3. Head off would be 3. AADT for the intersection. The way that you do intersections is actually interesting. You add up each of the legs. So if there's 6,000 on this road and 2,000 on this road, the AADT for that intersection is the sum, which would be 8,000. Which in this example, I'll just do 3 as well. Do 3 there. I did 3 for that one, 2 for that one. Now, I said I don't know my motorcycle numbers. So what do I do in this example? And there is a little cheat. And basically, if you do not have the counts that specify how many motorcycles per day you've got in an environment, you take 1% of your AADT. So if we have 6,000 vehicles going through there, we assume 1% of them are motorcyclists. In other words, we have 600 motorcyclists today. And if I go back to my little table, we can see if I've got, I think that's 600, no, 60, sorry, that was 10%, 60 units per day. So we've got 60 motorcyclists a day. Thank you for the correction. That was my error. A bit too excited there. So that's a score of 3. The cheat to remember with this one is if you are using the 1% method, the score that you assign these categories will be the same for that one. It's just the way that it works. So you take 1% of your AADT. I guess it's good practice to refer back to that table just to make sure that it's all lining up. But that's how the exposure score is calculated. So there's not a lot of subjectivity. There's not a lot of, trying to agree or disagree. It's purely based on the numbers. So hopefully that one is, everyone's happy with that. As I said, the exposure is the easiest one to do out of these rows. Here's where things get very interesting. So we'll look at likelihood now. Actually, I'm going to ignore those numbers because I don't like too much text going on the slide. So I'm just going to delete them just so we're working with something fresh. And the way that we examine our likelihood is we would actually separate each of these columns into factors that increase the risk of and factors that decrease the risk of. So as an example, if you're analyzing the runoff road risk of your site, you could say, these are the factors that I believe are increasing the level of risk, and dot point them all out. And then say, these are the factors that I believe are decreasing the level of risk. So things that could be increasing the level of risk is you've got very, very narrow shoulders that are unsealed. It's a curvy geometry. Well, there's an out of context curve. It's a very high speed environment. It's 2 hours in between, attraction. So fatigue might kick in. All those types of things could increase the level of risk for runoff road. Things that would decrease the likelihood is, well, the route is incredibly well delineated. There's lots of guideposts. There's lighting at night, so it's very easy to see. Yeah, other things like that. There's RRPMs along the route just to help with that delineation as well. And to actually spell out, these are all the factors that I think increase and decrease the level of risk associated with runoff road. You do that for each of the crash types. So you go along this matrix and dot point what are the increasing and decreasing factors. Now, I'll go back over to our fancy table and I'll delete all of this stuff as well. And this time I'm just going to cross over the stuff that we don't need to look at yet, just so we can focus on the likelihood. This is mostly for me. It just helps me focus my attention. So for a crash likelihood score of 0, the definition is there's only a minimal chance that a given crash type can occur. Only extreme behavior or substantial vehicle failure could lead to a crash. I'll be honest, it's very rare that you would apply a score of 0 for the likelihood. An example of that is if you had let's just stick with the runoff road crash. If you had a continuous flexible barrier system, and that would virtually eliminate the risk of death and serious injury for runoff road crashes because the barrier system will be able to contain an errant vehicle. However, if you're going 200 kilometers per hour and you're in a truck, the barrier system is not meant to be able to withstand that type of force. And so there is that possible for death and serious injury. Generally, those zeros not used that often. So you can kind of ignore that one. Here's where, as I said, things get fun because you get to be a little bit subjective in your analysis. And you'll see that the phrase used is for a score of 1 for likelihood, it is highly unlikely that a given crash type will occur. Full stop. For a score of 2, it is unlikely that a given crash type will occur. Score of 3, it is likely that a given crash type will occur. Score of 4, the likelihood of individual road user areas linked to a crash type is high. I have no idea why they kind of changed the wording for this one. They should have just said it is highly likely this given crash type will occur. That's just how to read it. But at least in this one, we've got some examples. So high approach to a speed to a sharp curve, priority movement control, filtering right turn across several opposing lanes, high speed. So at least we've got some examples there to be able to gauge what score we're given. But I'm sure you could all appreciate what one person defines as likely another person could say, no, that's unlikely. And so you get into this space of, well, should it be a score of 2 or a score of 3? The way that is mitigated, the subjectivity is mitigated as risk, is you always conduct your safe system assessments as a team. So it's not just one person's opinions, and they may have biases. You conduct this as part of a team, and you have these discussions. Well, is it unlikely? Is it likely? You put down all those factors, increasing and decreasing that risk, and you come together for a score. Now, every now and then, you're unable to see eye to eye with your peers, and that's just the nature of working within this environment. No one's right, no one's wrong, but you may be unable to get that agreement. And in those scenarios, you can actually meet in the middle, and you can do a half score. So you can do 2.5, you can do 3.5, you can do 1.5, you can do 0.5, you can do half scores, but that is as granular as it gets. You don't go more granular than that. You don't go 2.25 or 2.1, purely because this framework is just not set up for that granularity. It is a high level indication for safe system alignment, and the half score is as far as you go. Loretta.
Just on the crash, can you use crash data to support the likelihood?
Good question. You can certainly reference crash data. And if there's a trend in crashes occurring, I think that'd be very relevant to include. But I'd be hesitant on relying on crash data. So, for instance, if no runoff road crashes have occurred there, that's not to say that there's a low likelihood of crashes occurring there. It's just it hasn't eventuated. So you can step back a bit away from the data and just focus on what that road environment looks like, what the infrastructure is providing, and just focusing on the likelihood of an event occurring, not relying on past crash history. Good question. So that is our likelihood category. And the final one is severity. Severity of crashes are always to do with speed. So the speed of the crash, impact speed. If you're able to influence that, you'll be able to get a reduction in score. For intersection crashes, the other pertinent factor with severity is the impact angle. So if it's a T intersection and you've got the possible for right angle crashes, that would have a higher severity. If it's a roundabout where you've got more acute angle crashes, you may have a lower severity score. Percentage of heavy vehicles, as I spoke about before, could also be placed in that category. And for the runoff road one there, you could also consider barrier systems. So if there's a fully, so if there's a continuous containment system set up there, the roadside, then it's much less severe to crash into that than trees, utility poles beyond that. So you can consider what's beyond the roadside in the runoff road crash there. Let's have a look at the scoring for severity. So it's actually similar wording to what we use for the likelihood. So score of 0, should a crash occur, there's only minimal chance that it will result in fatal or serious injury. This one, once again, you'd be hesitant to put 0. It's not a common practice to use 0 for crash severity. I guess if you're in a 10 km/h, shared zone where vehicles are very, very slow, but even in those areas, we do get elderly people hit and they can suffer serious outcomes. So just be wary of putting 0 for severity in that one as well. Score of 1 for severity is highly unlikely that it will result in a fatal or serious injury. And that's something that I really want to make everyone aware is the severity that we're actually analyzing is fatal and serious injuries. So we're not focused on minor injuries or property damage or things like that. That's not a focus of the SAFE system assessment. It is those deaths and serious injuries from that specific environment that you're looking at. So that's what we're focusing on. To get a score of 2 for severity, it is unlikely that it will result in an FSI. For a score of 3, it is likely an FSI will occur. Score of 4, it is highly likely. So this is another one where you have to deliberate as a team to determine whether it's a likely fatal or serious injury outcome or an unlikely, is it highly likely? And you need to have that collaboration just to demonstrate that it's not just one person's opinion. You can help to gauge that you've got different perspectives involved there. As I spoke about at the start, this is very, very useful as you're just getting stuck into SSAs and the scoring, the severity. So let's say you're looking at an intersection and you've got a side impact collision that could occur and the speed environment is 50. You can see roughly that falls within the score of 3 category. So it's slightly on borderline 2 or 3, but that could be helping you determine, okay, well, perhaps for this intersection column, the severity row, I put down a score of 3 because I can reference this as a bit of evidence there. So very, very useful as you're just getting stuck into it. Have a look at this to help determine your scores. You would have also noticed that the highest score you can get is 4. The lowest score you can get is 0. So that's also good to note. Loretta, I saw you pop up and then disappear. How are things at your end?
Thank you. Just talking about speed, actually. So does the crash speed refer to the, oh, sorry, actually, I'm going to go back one. So for the speed, do we use the signposted speed limit or the detected experienced driving speed is the first question.
Good question. I would always reference the operating. So actually what users' behavior is within there, because take 100 kilometer per hour speed limits, we know that vehicles may be going 110. So I would be using that as my severity speed threshold.
Which I think kind of rolls into the next one. So does the crash speed refer to the speed differential? So for a head-on at 60 kilometers per hour, is the speed really 120 kilometers per hour?
Good question. So for head-ons, the way that we measure the speed, or we assume, so let's say 60 is the one. We would say that that's 2 vehicles colliding head-on at 60 kilometers per hour. So the differential there, the change of speed, is equal to 60, because you're going, if you're driving head-on there, you're going from 60 to 0 very, very abruptly. So it wouldn't be 120. 120 would be if you've got the same direction type of crash. And you're kind of glancing off there. But the change of velocity involved in those ones would actually be very, very low, because you're not going from 60 to nothing. You're going from 60 to maybe 55. You know, because you have a little bit of a collision, but you're not actually dropping off that much speed. So that's not actually example of 120. Sorry, I take that back. The only instance where you might have one which is 120 would be if you had a, try and draw it out. If you had this type of collision occurring, and this was a little smart car, and this was a truck, because then possibly the overall crash would be 60 going that way, which means this smart car is lost to 60 and then also going 60 in the opposite way. So they would have an effective change of V of 120. It's overcomplicating things though. The way that we actually, just think about the head-on crashes is both passenger vehicles traveling at the same speed, colliding head-on, and it's like 60 and 60. They come to a stop and they're at 0. So the change of V is 60 kilometers per hour. I might pause there, Loretta, and give everyone a chance to have a little break. So let's say 4 minutes, and in 4 minutes time, we'll get stuck back into our matrix. Let's get stuck back into our safe system matrix, and I'll just demonstrate all of the work that we've done to date. So we've gone through the exposure, the likelihood and severity, each of these crash types, and we've assigned a score for each of them. These scores will differ from what I spoke about before. That's okay, that's just to demonstrate. So run-off road, let's say it was a score of 3. Let's say we thought things were highly likely for that crash to occur, and we give it a score of 4. But let's say there's lots of barrier systems in place. So we're actually going to give a severity score of 1. The way that we come to our overall crash risk score, I'm sure some of you may have guessed, is the risk is the product of exposure, likelihood, and severity. So we just multiply. And that's the reason I chose easy numbers there, because we've got 3 times 4, which I know is 12, and then multiply that by 1 is also 12. So for the run-off road crash risk score, you get a score of 12. Worst case scenario, let's say pedestrian numbers, we've got lots of pets, and it's highly likely for a pedestrian crash to occur. And the speed environment means it's very likely that that would be a fatal or serious instance. That would be a score of 4 times 4 times 4, which is 64. So the highest score that you can get out of each crash risk, crash type, is 64. So in other words, every one of those columns is measured out of 64. Once you've got all your scores, you then go and add up each of those columns. So 12 plus whatever your head-on is, plus intersection, plus your other score, plus 64, plus cyclist, plus motorcyclist. And that gives you an overall score. The overall score is measured out of, I hope I've got this right, 448, which is 64 times 7. Someone feel free to get the calculator out and double check my knowledge. But that's the highest that you could potentially get for a project. And if you were getting 448 out of 448, got the thumbs up there, thank you very much. That is indicative that the site that you're assessing is very poorly aligned with safe system principles, and there is quite a road safety risk there. Now we can jump through these ones. And I'll take you back to where we started things off. So this was actually the site where I had shown you the output. So I showed you that graph with the different design options and the different scores associated with all of them at the start. This was the site that was actually analyzed. So existing conditions, it's just a give way type of arrangement on an angled horizontal curve there. The design option 2, as it was referred to, was to create or roundabout. The design option 3A was to create a signalized intersection, but to make it a modified T. So as I said, I've explained what the modified T was. It's basically the priority is this leg. And then this one kind of stops there. So it's still maintaining that curve basically, but that one is signalized. 3B was a more conventional T intersection. So you can see that that leg has been straightened up, and now we've just got a conventional T that has been signalized. So the Safe System Assessment team completed an existing conditions SSA matrix, which is what you're looking at here. So you don't just get to put the score in and say, beautiful, job's done. You have to explain how you got to that score. So factors that increased the likelihood for a runoff road crash. I'll zoom in because it's a pretty small thing. Factors that increase the likelihood for the runoff road crash. Bend has substandard radius. Speed is 60 kilometers per hour, but advisory is 35. There's minimal to no shoulder. Guideposts were missing. Generally no curb and channel. So you can just really, it's dot pointed out. They're not paragraphs here. You don't want paragraphs here because this matrix can quickly get huge. You want to make sure that these are just the salient points, the most important details. Things that decrease this risk though, the lanes are wide, advisory speed limit, edge lines, street lighting. And that, the assessors said, would warrant a score of 2.5. Same conversation around the severity, things that increase the severity. There's unshielded hazards, there's trees and poles. There's also a culvert there, which I didn't show. Speeds may be high, although the speed limit is 60, it could be higher than that. Also the downhill approach. Factors that decrease the severity, vehicle coming the other way, going uphill, could be lower speeds there. So the severity was given 2 in this instance. We'll just double check the scoring looks all good. And we've got 3 multiplied by 2.5 multiplied by 2. So I'll do it the other way because 2 times 2.5 is 5. 5 times 3 is 15. So you can see the product there is 15 out of 64. That was then completed for each of the different crash types, and an overall sum or total was produced, which was 118.5 out of 448. That by itself does not mean much. If you just say that this project has a score of 118.5 out of 448, it doesn't really tell you a lot. There's the main benefit or perk of completing the Safe System Assessment is the comparison. So comparing the existing conditions to other proposed solutions. In other words, this is what sets the benchmark, your existing conditions. You then go on to complete additional Safe System Assessment matrices, your design options, which are referenced against this benchmark. So the way that you actually do it is you just copy and paste your existing conditions assessment. So you just copy and paste that matrix and then change your title to whatever it is that you're reviewing. So you're reviewing the roundabout, which is design option 2. A few formatting recommendations is if you are changing anything from the existing conditions, anything that is new, just put it in a red font or any color font, just so that it stands out. It just makes it so much easier for the reader to be able to see what's changing. Similarly, if things are being removed as risks, cross that out. So apply strike-through formatting so that you can see that change. I'll zoom in again on that exact same section so we can have a look at what is changing here. You can see that the bend has been crossed out because that no longer exists. Guideposts are being replaced, so that one doesn't exist anymore, generally no curve or channel. Lane widths are changing, advisory, and then there's a few additional factors here. There's reasonably straight approaches, substandard bend has been removed. So this one has actually kind of put it in two places because crossing off the bend and then also adding it in there, it's just, I guess, highlighting that that has changed. So that's fine. And the score has reduced to 1.5. I actually prefer to cross off the previous score here as well, just to also make it obvious. So this went from a score of, I can't remember, I'm going to say 2. Went from no, I think it was 2.5. This went from a score of 2.5 to 1.5, just to make things easier for the reader as well, not going back and forth. So that is, so we don't have the severity for this one, but the severity score for this one. But anyway, that's what you do. You're just basically crossing off things that are no longer relevant and anything that has been added, popping it in red text. You then go back to your existing conditions table and you create another copy. Do the same process for the signalized intersection. It's modified. Signalized intersection with the T. And it's just repeating that process. So always referencing that base case or that benchmark, which was your existing conditions. So very, very important that you're just copying that table and then changing things from that one. And at the end of the day, what we get is an overall score, which our existing conditions, 118.5, the roundabout is giving us a score of 90, modified T, 99, and conventional T, 105. So the first thing that I can quickly ascertain is that the lowest score out of all of these is the roundabout. So it indicates to me that the roundabout is the best aligned with safe system principles at a high level. So that's just a quick glance. That's what I can determine. The other thing to note is that all of the designs that have been analyzed are improving things because they all have lower scores than the existing conditions. So all of them are showing merit in terms of their safety benefit. So that's also a good thing to see. You don't always get that. Sometimes there are proposals that are making things worse. Loretta.
Thank you. I guess just on that scoring matrix, there was a question, so I thought I'd grab you while I can. So is there a score matrix that is used for the total score that is out of 448? Above 350 is black, below 100 is yellow to green.
It's a good question. So I like the theory of it, and there has been some work in the movement in place space to create those bands, I guess you could call it. What would be, very well aligned or poorly aligned. Score of 100 and below is excellent, very well aligned, or whatever it is. The risk with that approach is that there is subjectivity in this. So we did talk about that before. What an individual may say is highly likely, someone else may say is only likely, and that's the difference between 4 and 3. And when you go on to multiply out those score changes, it can make a pretty significant change in your overall score. So there can be a bit of hesitancy about applying a global, banding system there, because another way to phrase that is this report completed and these were the scores that we got, right? That was that particular safe system assessment team. If we handed this exact site to someone else that were equally as qualified within the safe system assessment process and had the same level of experience and things like that, it's likely that we would have variance in our scores. And that's okay, as long as they're, within certain tolerance, but it's likely that there would be changes in those scoring. So to be able to provide a cutoff to say that this is the score that we consider is very well aligned, it may be difficult to draw that line. The only exception I can think of, sorry that I'm going on a rant here, Loretta, the only exception I can think of is if you have got a safe system assessment team and they are reviewing multiple projects, but it's the same team. And they're looking at all these different sites, but they're doing it time and time again within their own risk, assessment and risk appetite. So theoretically, they could apply that banding system because what they consider a high likelihood would be comparable to the other sites that they've looked at. So that's the only instance where you actually could apply something like that. But it's a bit difficult to do it globally when every individual has their own way of scoring these things. Good question.
Thanks, Max. I love your rants because it really puts things into real perspective. So that was
Thank
awesome.
you,
Thank
Loretta.
you.
You're very kind.
But another question that's come through, are there cases where the scope is to assess half of an intersection? Example, an approach to the intersection is done by others or part of a separated design phase?
Not that I've ever been involved with. I think that would be a bit unusual. I think it's better for a safe system assessment team to have that full scope so they can appreciate the overall context. Separating in that fashion might be difficult for the client as well to have kind of two different reports spitting out two different risks. So I haven't seen it, and I wouldn't really recommend it.
Yeah. While we've got you going on rants, one more for you. In terms of movement in place, is it mainly the exposure volume section of the scoring matrix that considers this?
So the movement in place, where that would fit in is going back to our prompts and setting the context. If you've identified that this is a places for people or whatever it is, we know in those environments we want to see low speeds, just create that area where people feel confident and comfortable walking and spending time in. That could then feed into the way that you assess the severity of crashes, because if there's high speeds going through there, well, you know that this adjacent land use and the movement in place classification does not meet that expectation or that objective, and so you could potentially adjust your scoring for that. So that's probably where I'd be putting a lot of that. You could also put, fill into your likelihood category there. But in terms of where do you actually clearly articulate the movement in place classification, I'd put that within the scope of the report, up where the prompts were, and keep it out of the matrix, purely because you don't want too much wording going in the matrix. Otherwise, I try to keep every matrix to a 1A3 sheet, landscape sheet, because if it's going over multiple pages, it gets out of control and it's really hard to keep track of what score goes where. Okay, so that's the high level, just looking at the total score, but as we talked about before, we are able to drill into the details. So we could have just looked at the high level, seen that the roundabout is the lowest score, so let's go with that option. But looking further into the report, we can see that cyclist crash risks are going up. So that could then signify to the design team that, well, what have we got within our repertoire to try and bring this score down? And in fact, as a safe system assessment team, you are able to provide those recommendations. So you're not just there about, pointing out all the things and all the level of risks associated with designs. You get to influence, well, what kind of treatments should we be looking at instead? The way that we categorize our treatments are primary and supporting. And we're going to focus on the first two. A primary treatment refers to any kind of road planning, design, management considerations. You'll likely just be looking at design. Any kind of design alterations that virtually eliminate the potential of fatal and serious injuries. So that's the key phrase there. If it's a primary treatment, it's expected to virtually eliminate FSIs. The reason that this classification is in place is we really want to put primary treatments on a bit of a pedestal, and we want to see more appetite for going with them because they are going to offer the greatest level of safety benefits for our community. We know that if we implement more primary treatments, we are going to see reductions in our road trauma. Supporting treatments will improve the overall level of safety associated, but are not expected to virtually eliminate the potential of FSI crashes. So a perfect example of this, a supporting treatment could be our traffic signals, because we know traffic signals, say it's a uncontrolled stop sign currently. If we're recommending traffic signals, we know that that is not going to virtually eliminate the potential for FSIs because you can still have red light runners. So the potential for those high speed 90-degree crash intersection crashes can still occur. So that would be classified as supporting. If you're looking at that same environment, what could be recommended as primary could be a roundabout. You don't have to go into the specifics of what that roundabout would look like, but generally roundabouts could be listed as primary, or the signalized intersection with those raised safety platforms. So it's actually bringing down speeds through the conflict point. Within, I have to remember now, I think it's the Austroads guide, the Austroads Safe System Assessment Framework. There is a list of each of the crash types, so run off road, head on, other, etc., etc. And then it says, here's some treatments for each of these different crash types and categorizes them into primary and supporting. It also says if that influences exposure, likelihood, severity. So that's a very, very useful little resource there. So primary, just remember, primary is we're expecting it to virtually eliminate the risk of FSI crashes. Non-safe system, the reason that I've sent this to the BIM and not focused on this one is because you wouldn't be recommending anything that is not safe system. It is basically design considerations that are not expected to achieve an overall improvement. So you wouldn't be recommending, hey, you know what we should do? We should make things more dangerous at this intersection and increase the speed. It's just, you wouldn't do that within a safe system assessment report. So that thinking is a bit redundant. But you could potentially use that phrasing if there were suggestions from the clients or from the project team, and you could say, I believe that would fit into the non-safe system treatment. But you wouldn't use that term at all. Some more prompts for you, and this is generally done prior to the SSA matrix, but it further contextualizes the site that you're looking at. Once again, these prompts are within the Austroads framework, so you just copy and paste them and just answer to them. And it's all about reflecting on the other pillars to do with the safe system assessment or safe system framework. So basically everything that we've looked at has to do with infrastructure and design, but we know that safer roads makes up one quadrant of the, or safer roads and safer speeds is what we look at. But we should also reflect on the road users, the vehicles, and post-crash care. So things that you can ask yourself is, what are the likelihood of users being aware? Are they likely to be inebriated if you're near a pub that you're doing an assessment near? Yeah, with school children near there, that's where you can collate some of that thinking. The vehicle one, it's a little bit airy-fairy at this stage, but as we are getting to more autonomous vehicles on our network, this will become much more pertinent. Basically, are there areas for those vehicles to be able to run safely? They got all the signs and lines that they need. Are they not masked by vegetation and things like that, or anything that could be misconstrued or confusing for an autonomous vehicle? They're factors that may attract large numbers of unsafe vehicles. So that could be talking about vintage car meets and things like that, where you may not have that ANCAP 5-star vehicle present. It's something that was built in a different era. Post-crash care, that is referencing if a serious incident does occur, how accessible is this site? An example of this where this was very much looked into, we're completing a safe system assessment on a road that led up to the mountains up in Victoria, and it was very inaccessible. So one of the recommendations was, well, the post-crash care is quite poor. It would basically take hours for an ambulance to attend the site. So could we instead look at strategically placing some helipads to get Medivac in there to have some of those situations reduced? So that's where you could be looking at, thinking bits outside the box there. Loretta.
Hi, Max. I've got a few questions for you, which hopefully is good
Sure.
timing before we kick on to that report. I'm going to go back a little bit. So for AADT existing case, do you use numbers before or after development?
You would do existing, so before any development, and then as part of your design option review, you would use any after that. If modeling is being done, you would definitely take those figures.
Thank you. Next question. Why would you recommend a non-safe system treatment?
You wouldn't. I've never done it, and I would not suggest anyone here would be either. The safe system assessment is about identifying the risk, recommending improvements. You wouldn't recommend anything that's going to make things worse.
Thank you. All right, the last one at the moment is, can you talk to the two types of supporting treatments given in the Ausroads SSA framework? One is compatible with future implementation of SS options. The other does not affect future implementation of SS options.
It's a good question. I was hoping to avoid the topic. The reason that we do not include that in, because industry tends to also not demarcate the supporting into these kind of subheadings, but I'm happy to chat through it. The reason that it's not used is because it's just confusing and it's kind of erroneous. It's like overkill. So supporting can actually be brought into a supporting bucket or a step towards bucket. A step towards treatment is something where if you were to implement this recommendation, we're actually getting closer to the primary, right? So a step towards, an example of it would be, let's say you've got a rural carriageway this with no sealed shoulders or anything like that. A step towards, or a primary recommendation in this example would be, let's do barrier containment systems on the edge and the median. That would be primary. A step towards would be, let's build out the shoulders. Let's create a wide median. So that's not actually a barrier system, but just painted median, just to create extra room there. And then we're giving extra formation width so that in the future, we would have the ability to install a barrier system. That's what step towards means. It's just saying that we're creating a possibility that in the future, a primary treatment could be implemented. As I said, it's overly confusing and not well utilized within industry, which is why we haven't gone to the detail of it in this module, but that's the separation between the two. We just go for primary treatment or supporting treatment. That's a nice, easy way to collate the two. Loretta, any other questions before I get stuck into the report?
Yes. So would you take into consideration of design year AADT future?
Yes. So that's where it can get a little bit dicey, because let's say you're doing modeling and you're projecting future traffic volume for 2025, 2030, 2040. Which year do you actually use? And there's no hard and fast rule about that. You just spell it out in the report. This SSA has, got modeling data that has previously been completed, and we will be using the 2030 predicted AADT for this road, which is 7,500 vehicles per day. It's rare that the score would change. So let's say 2030 was 7,500 vehicles per day. That's an exposure score of 3. The 2050 value predicted could be 9.5, which is also a score of 3. So, I mean, it is theoretically possible that you would have different score values, but as a safe system assessment team, you just need to say which is the future case scenario that we are going to analyze or assume, and then go from there. But there's not a hard and fast rule there. Oh, Loretta.
Is there limited traffic data, missing pedestrian counting or HB percentage, or out-of-date data that can SSA still be done, or needs first to collate all the relevant data?
It's a good question. Like, in a perfect world, you'd have it all at your fingertips, but we don't live in the perfect world. You don't need to make that a requirement of the safe system assessment. It just means the safe system assessors will be assuming. So, for instance, pedestrian one, we rarely have that data. What you could reflect on is, if there's actually footpaths within the area, what's the adjacent land use? If there's nothing there, it's a rural intersection, you would expect the pedestrian volumes between that 1 to 10 mark. You wouldn't say 0, because someone might need to stop there and change their tire, but you would certainly expect very low numbers. Conversely, if you're working at a signalized intersection where there's a KFC on one corner and Hungry Jack's on the other, I would expect high numbers of pedestrians. So you can make those assumptions, and you don't have to rely on actual figures. The other thing is, if you were actually doing the safe system assessment, is you'd be out on site, so you'd get a good appreciation of who's there, what kind of users, and you're not going to be there for a full 24 hours, but at least you'll get some kind of indication of what modes are there and what kind of volumes would be reasonable to expect. But no, you don't need to have that as prerequisite for completing an SSA. Okay, safe system assessment report. So it is a formal structure we've listed out some things that are like the table of contents, I suppose you could call it. You need to talk about whether it's a full or a rapid SSA. Next module will cover what those terms mean. You need to list out who was the assessment team, any meetings that you had, site inspections, brief description of the SSA process, your background, all of your prompts that we chatted through, make sure that's included in there. Safe system assessment matrix, referencing the other safe system assessment elements or the pillars, and also your recommendations. So basically everything that we chatted through in today's module just needs to be collated in a formal report. We've given you a report template on the LMS that you are welcome to just copy, put your own little badge on it and change the font to your specific liking or whatever your organization uses. That's fine. We're happy for you to use all that information. You don't need to reinvent the wheel there. And in fact, your assignment will be going through a safe system assessment. So on the LMS that Loretta will show you shortly, we have got a Word document, which is this template that I just alluded to. And we've highlighted sections that we want you to fill in. Everything that's not highlighted, you would have to do if you were doing a safe system assessment in the real world. But for this assignment, don't worry about it. I only want you to do the highlighted stuff. You're going to be doing a matrix, or matrices, I should say, because you're going to be doing an existing conditions matrix and also a design matrix as well. And you're going to be producing one of those nice graphs that we looked at before. We've got a graph generator as well, just in case you're not too savvy with Excel. Basically just pop in some numbers and I'll make you a nice pretty picture you can copy and paste into this report. So we've done all of that background work for you just to limit the amount of hours that you need to put into this assignment. As part of the assignment as well, we're actually going to get you out onto the site, which means we need you to be safe. So this is a mock safe system assessment, but the risks are very real. So if you are out there looking at specific features, please make sure that you are wearing high-vis vests. We don't want you to be a hazard. We don't want you to put yourself at risk. If you get out there and you don't feel comfortable, you think that the site is too high risk, just let us know. Don't go out there. We don't want you to feel that unease. So that's fine. Stay off the road. Make sure you pick somewhere safe to park and to access the site and things like that. We also have a safe work method statement, or SWMS, which is on our LMS. We'll get you to flick through that, which is basically all the risks that we've identified for your specific sites. And we have created a bit of a risk mitigation methodology just to ensure that we're not sending people that have no experience within this space, that they've got some control. So we need you to wear your high-vis vest, look through the SWMS, and there's actually like a sign-off sheet for the SWMS as well, just to indicate that you've read through the SWMS and that you will abide by the controls. And the controls are not significant. It's just don't go out onto site with beers, no beers on site, no beers beforehand. Don't speed to the site. Make sure you're conspicuous and park outside of the traffic lane. We don't need you measuring carriageway widths or anything like that, so don't need to go to that level of detail. You don't require a spotter for this activity. It's just a high-level look at the road that you're investigating. I'll hand all over to my pal, Loretta.
Thank you. All right. The first thing that's come up, which firstly share my screen, is in regards to the site address that we've provided. So I'll cover that in a sec. But as you know, we're in module 4, so you can see my screen. That's correct, Max?
Yep. Crystal clear.
Thank you. All right. First thing you need to do for today's module task is, of course, a quiz. So hopefully you've got a few minutes before, 12 or 12 Eastern time to finish that. But Max did refer to the SWIMS document, so please ensure you're clicking through all of these. So click through the statement, of course, have a read through, and then once you've done that, you also need to ensure that you've read it and agree to it. So simply click on Attempt Quiz and answer that question. More importantly, it is the assessment. So for the assignment, as Max has already explained, we have provided a template. So the first 2 documents you'll see here, firstly is the template and the graph generator, which we'll go through, Max will go through again. Couple of things. So firstly, we have provided you with a site address to do this mock assessment. The address that we've used is based on how you were registered. So I know someone in the chat said, 7 hours away. We don't want you driving 7 hours to do your assignment. So please email me. So if it's an address that is not convenient for you for that reason, please let me know and we'll source a new site address for you to complete your assignment. And once again, if you cannot upload the assignment, please email that through as well, depending on firewalls, etc. So before we go on, I'll just quickly show you again how to add your submission. So clicking on Add Submission, once you've saved your document, you've completed your report, etc., and you add it in here and then save changes. So that's basically sort of how to work the system as you would have done for the previous assignment. So I'll just bring up the template and the generator so Max can talk them through. So this is the graph generator. Loading on my other screen. I won't be a moment.
Oh no.
Got some issues, won't be a sec. Here we are. You can see that?
Yep.
Okay, so that's the first one. And then we have the template.
Excellent. Thanks, Loretta.
It's just loading up. All righty. So here is the template. And we can run through this now. So as Max mentioned, I'll hand over to you, but all those highlighted sections are the sections we need to run through.
Beautiful. So lots of it will be struck out, basically just for your notes. If you were completing a real SSA, you would have to fill that in as well, but just doing the highlighted sections. So feel free to scroll through, Loretta. Don't worry about the executive summary. Would like your name for the assessment team. We don't need to worry about the prompts for this one because we haven't given you any of that information. But just summarize what the works are. So if your design is showing there's a roundabout being installed, just spell that out basically. Define the speed limit. You'll need that from your site conditions. And then we just get straight into the scoring. So we actually have to do the matrices first before we can paste this graph here. So we can scroll down to the matrices, Loretta. And you'll see this is the existing conditions. And the way that we would do it is we just clearly, there's an example there as well of just spelling out all of those factors that increase and decrease the level of likelihood or severity for those different things. Have a go at recommending some primary treatments and supporting treatments. So you can see we've clearly delineated those 2 kind of buckets of treatments because we want to give primary treatments that pedestal, as I mentioned. We want to really favor those treatments more. Please do get a photo out on site preferably a selfie, just as proof that you went out there wearing your high vis. To replace Ken there with you, that'd be fantastic. And that's the report. The Excel document, the generator, it's fairly self-explanatory. All you need to do is, once you've got all your scoring set up associated with your existing conditions and your designs, you just fill in those orangey. Do you call that orange, Loretta? Olive?
I'd say orange, amber, maybe.
Amber. It's a weird color. You just pop in your number there, and you want to just do like 2, 2, and 2 for. Oh, I meant going down.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's
Yep.
right.
I knew that.
And then it'll automatically give you the score of 8. And has that popped up on the graph there as well?
It should.
There you go.
Yep.
So you can see it's all automatic. And then once you've completed that table, you just copy and paste that graph into your report, and that's you good to go. Another neat little trick, and this is, I guess, only if you're completing SSAs in the future. If you use this, which you're welcome to, you can copy the graph, and then within Word, there's paste and link. If you click on that function, it just means if you do any changes to this Excel, it automatically updates in Word. So you don't have to keep overriding things. It's Max's little fun tip. And just down the bottom there, Loretta, as well, the tab that says 2 design options. Just in the future, if you're looking at 2 different designs, we've given you that one as well. And we've also given you 3 design options as well. You don't need it for this assignment, just in case you need that one in the future. In terms of time spent on this assignment, I'm thinking that a couple hours in total should be good for the assignment. We don't want lots and lots of paragraphs of information, because really what we're going to be assessing you on is your ability to classify things in their correct category of exposure, likelihood, and severity, and recommending treatments that would either be primary or supporting. Do you want to open up a random design there as well, Loretta?
Yeah, and just while it's loading, I'll just point out, so everyone's name, like you've been allocated your site here. So if you find your name, just click on that, and that's your actual site address. That was a question that came in, I forgot to mention earlier.
Good pickup. So I just picked one. What we've got going on here, you can see that there's some notes, which is saying install road safety barrier, 100 meters length, flexible W-beam, and it's got the departure terminals as well. Also installing some CAM, chevron alignment markers. You can see in the text box that's now red, the following traffic volumes, that's right, have been provided for the purpose of this training exercise. So the road has 1,500 AADT, 2% heavy vehicles. There's 5 cyclists there a day. There's no pedestrians. So we've actually given you all the traffic volume information. You may know that this road actually has 5,000 vehicles a day or whatever it is, but we're going to mark you on those metrics. So you don't need to worry about your current understanding of the road. Please just use those metrics, because that's how our markers know that you're assigning the correct score for those things. There may be instances where the motorcycle volumes are not provided. So you will have to go back to that little tip that I gave you before about how we would assume motorcycle volumes when we don't get given it. Yeah, I think that was it. So you can download your assignment at the end of today. Have a think about if that's going to work for you. If it's too far away or you're unable to get there, just let the training team know and we'll be able to find you a new site. If you've got, like some people have got the same site, so one site has multiple people, we still need to see individual reports. So we need individual assessments you're welcome to talk about it as a team. You're welcome to go out to site as a team. No issues there. But we can't have you just copying and pasting the same assessments because we need to grade you individually.
I might just jump in there. So if you do have, any specific questions or concerns, again, about, the site, what to cover, please email training, myself and the team, and we'll check with our colleagues to direct you on that. I know there's been a couple of questions as well in the chat, Max. So I think the first one was, are we drawing the options?
No. So you're just referring to that design that's on the LMS, and that is the design that you're looking at. So there's no need for you to do any design work or drawing.
In regards to speed limit, if the speed limit is a temporary speed limit that is currently on the site, do you use this speed limit?
Good question. I think it's best in your safe system assessment matrix just to spell out exactly what it was. So I'd be more leaning towards taking conventional existing conditions. So if they just happen to be doing, I don't know, vegetation clearing, they drop the speed limit to 40 kilometers per hour on that day that you're inspecting, I would generally just say, well, usually this site is 60 kilometers per hour. So that's what I would do. But if it is a longer term setup as 40 kilometers per hour, there is value in actually reviewing the speed from that scenario. So as long as you clearly articulate within the safe system assessment matrix and the report, this is the speed limit as observed on site, that's completely fine.
Need an electronic device when on site, do you, Max?
Sorry, do you want to say that again?
Should we have our electronic device, computer 2-in-1 when at the site?
No, just mobile phone, so you can take a photo, take a selfie, but we don't want you spending any time, not focused on your surroundings.
A question that's come through is in regards to signs and line marking.
Yep.
And a training that I think Raman has attended and needs some clarification. I was informed that dragon teeth line marking doesn't work. Theoretically, it should, but practically it doesn't. Can you please clarify?
I believe I'll take this one offline. My understanding is certain scenarios it has been proven to be effective, but there are instances where it is overlooked and it doesn't have that speed reduction benefit. So I'll follow that one up offline.
Excellent. Well, Narelle, I'll get back to you on your question as well. So I'll send you an email, a couple of emails yet that I will get back to some participants. But I think that brings us to the end of the module. So you got time to finish your quiz. But like I said, if you have any questions, please email the training email and we'll help you out. The due date, I believe, is the 30th of May. So it gives you a couple of weeks, to get on site and then finalize your report.
Fabulous. Thanks, Loretta. And thanks, everyone. I hope you have
Max.
a lovely day. Enjoy your weekend and we'll be back next week. I think Ken's actually back next week. So lovely to
module 5 on Thursday.
Chat through this all, but if you want to get started on it before Thursday and ask Ken some tricky questions, that's a good opportunity too before we close the course.
Thanks everyone. Have a good one. Thanks,
Fabulous.
Max.
Take care. Bye.